Once upon a time, Tingle was the fourth most recognizable character in the Zelda series. The Triforce trio had him beat, of course, but Tingle was pretty comfortably ahead of its closest competition, probably Impa. In a series known for tossing characters aside after having featured them once or twice, Tingle was almost as ever-present as Link or Zelda. In fact, he got his own spin-off titles all the way back in 2006. But those days are now firmly behind us. This weird little dude hasn't appeared in the main series game since the Minish Cap, not counting remakes or Easter eggs. It leaves you to wonder, where did everything go wrong for Tingle? And why did IGN call him the Prince of Puke? More on that later. First, a quick history lesson. Tingle made his debut, as you probably know, on the Nintendo 64 in Majora's Mask. This game is where the majority of his characterization comes from. Not a whole lot about that has changed since then. Even though he is a 35-year-old Hylian, Tingle believes he is a fairy, to the annoyance of his father, who wishes his son would stop being so immature. He makes friends with Link and can be found all over Termina, because he travels from place to place in a balloon. It's the vantage point that gives him that leads to another very important characteristic of his job. Tingle is a map maker, which he sells to Link for a friendly price. This would continue to be his role for the years to come, which may sound ordinary, but it's really not. Even if the character's utilities returned, it was not at all a given the character did the same. There have been some exceptions of course, like Dampé and recently Beedle, but Tingle's recognizability was next level. And that was the factor that allowed him to return with other functions than what he was known for. In Oracle of Ages, Tingle was still a map maker, but in the Wind Waker, a transition has started where Tingle was going from being included for his job to branching out. In this game, he resides on Tingle Island, where he once again works with maps. However, he also hands Link the Tingle Tuner, an item that allows you to link your Game Boy Advance to your GameCube and make him playable for the first time ever. Later, in Four Swords Adventures, Tingle again appears as a sort of semi-rival, I guess is the word, providing competition in hunting for the coveted Force Gems. He also runs the multiplayer mode, Tingle's Tower. And then we already arrive at his final true appearance, the Minish Cap. Here, he once again has a new role, helping Link by fusing kinstone pieces with him, which allows Link to find secrets. But then, it was silent. After several important roles in consecutive titles, Tingle appeared to be cut entirely. A realistic representation of him did appear in Twilight Princess, and he had a few Easter egg appearances, like his outfit in Breath of the Wild or the plushie in Skyward Sword. But a Tingle made of flesh and blood was never seen in a mainline Zelda game again. It was spin-offs like Hyrule Warriors and Cadence of Hyrule this weirdo had to settle for. And speaking of spin-offs, one look at another makes his demise even weirder. In 2006, 7 and 9, 3 standalone titles were released in what I guess you could call the Tingle Series. The first, freshly picked Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land, released in both Japan and Europe on GBA, but the later two, both DS games, were exclusive to Japan. Not only is the idea of Tingle-focused spin-offs a bizarre idea in general, but what makes it even weirder is that by 2006, Tingle's absence had already begun, seeing as the Minish Cap is from 2004. So, is there a connection between the 3 Tingle games and his prolonged absence? Well, it's impossible to say for certain, but I suspect it definitely plays a role. To understand that better, we need to zoom in on Tingle's status. Because yes, he was at one point the 4th biggest character of the Zelda series. But was he popular? That entirely depends on who you'd ask. In Japan, Tingle was a very well-liked character. His demeanor and characterization of a 30-year-old man that believes he is a fairy was picked up as hilarious in Nintendo's homeland, and Tingle was definitely a popular character in the East. This can also be seen in the sales of his own sub-series, which were pretty respectable all things considered, and landed him a spot in best-selling lists during release weeks. But in a way, that makes the cancellation of not just the series, but also the character, all the more strange. Well, I suspect the reason for those decisions lies entirely in the West. Tingle may have been comedy gold in Japan, but Western Zelda fans at the time found him to be annoying, pathetic, and wholly unfunny. Nothing illustrates this better than IGN's campaign Die Tingle Die from 2004. The same year Tingle's last ever main series game released. Coincidence? I doubt it. Just a few highlights from this full-on hit piece on a fictional character. Tingle, the most hated entity in the Zelda universe, a label the Prince of Puke proudly wears. Or, we hate Tingle, we want him dead, accompanied with a gif of Tingle getting shot in the head. Different times, huh? But make no mistake, This wasn't just game journalists on one of their typical wild rants. This was genuinely the opinion on Tingle in America at the time. People did not like this dude, and I honestly don't think that opinion has changed, even if the vocality of it has subsided somewhat. Because it worked. For the release of freshly picked Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land, a survey was sent out to gauge whether there was any interest in the game to come to America. But even though the title was already translated into English for Europe, it still didn't come. So yeah, I'm willing to bet responses to that survey weren't exactly positive. It was feedback that Nintendo of America undoubtedly relayed back to Japan, giving the developers second thoughts about Tingle's future. His spin-off series continued for a while, but exclusively in Japan. I can imagine that making the game for such a small audience eventually reached a point where it wasn't worth it. Who knows, if the West had embraced the Tingle spin-offs, we may have seen them continue all the way up until now. But that wasn't to be, and so Tingle was cast aside for what has now been more than 20 years. The Zelda universe is in a completely different place now, with a completely different fanbase and place in the gaming world. So, does that mean Tingle has a future? Well, yes and no. First of all, you have to keep in mind the common opinion in the early 2000s, particularly concerning the Wind Waker. People were worried Zelda was gonna become too childish, and were craving for realistic, dark and serious. It led to Twilight Princess, but I think it also played a role in the downfall of Tingle. Not only was he wildly unpopular, he was the personification of everything Zelda fans didn't want. Cartoony, unrealistic and goofy to the max. But look at the series nowadays. Tears of the Kingdom might just be the most unserious game in the entire series, at least from a gameplay perspective, and the art style is absolutely not as gritty and dark as it once was. Any world that has Kilton living in it can also have Tingle in it, no questions asked. What I think may be a bigger problem for the, and I quote, most hated entity of the Zelda universe is the removal of his role. Because what better thing to prompt the developers to bring him back than in its own signature role of map maker or expert. But for these open world Zelda games, the map, and your way of using it, is so incredibly important it has to be tied to some strong and convenient game mechanics. And hate him or love him, but Tingle is too divisive and frankly inconvenient for such an important role. It's exactly this reason why we have seen Beedle again and again, but not Tingle. Every game needs shops, Beedle is the perfect simple shopkeeper, so slot him in. But Tingle's main role doesn't exist anymore, so he can only return if the developers specifically create a new role for him, like they did in the Minish Cap. Keeping that and his notoriety in mind, it's no surprise Tingle hasn't been seen recently. But it also doesn't rule him out, and with the current art style suiting his bizarre appearance, Tingle's chances right now are definitely better than they were 10 to 15 years ago. Time will tell whether we'll see this green weirdo again. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comments in what camp you find yourself. Team IGN or Team Tingle? I'm really curious what the Zelda fanbase thinks of him now, 20 years on. I personally always kinda like Tingle, so I wouldn't mind seeing him return. Especially in future open world games. Feels like the perfect little secret to tuck away somewhere. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Zelda content. For now, enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to see you again soon.